I will advertise from where I ought to be standing. There are 2 copies of this, I believe, in this library, and it's a middle school book. And it is, do you know this author, David Macaulay? Well, so this was his first book. And I also Googled him and discovered that he, for a while, lived in Bloomfield. So, but although he writes this about an imaginary Gothic cathedral and its construction, it is just superb because it gives not only the stages of building, but the scale of building and the perils of building and the scale compared to the town around it. Let's see where I can find. Where's the other? So when I'm talking about these tall buildings, when you lived in essentially hovels, what still strikes us as tall must have been almost inconceivable going in when they went into there. That they were transported into another world. So I encourage you, if you're, I think there was a PBS special, and I think there's probably a YouTube version of this book that I would encourage you to look at it. It's just called Cathedral. Yeah. And you might guess it was going to be cathedrals from what you have here. Because cathedrals are now, Gothic cathedrals are enjoyed by everyone, right? You know where the word Gothic comes from? How that was first applied to these? That was a pejorative. Because it's rude and crude, like work of the Goths. So it was a term first applied to it in the Renaissance, with a return to the classical past. So Romanesque art, the Romanesque age, that sort of 10th, 11th century, Gothic flourishes really late 12th, 13th century, and it's a more international phenomenon. We'll see how far we get today, how far I get today. And you know you're supposed to ask questions. I thought, not only have you seen how much in the 19th century was it by the time of Monet, who had a good sense of the commercial value of his art. At the same time, he was interested in doing grain stacks. He began to do these cathedrals because it was a time of the upsurge of patriotism in France, and people wanted them as subject matter. He chose it because it has such an extremely complex facade, breaking up the patterns, just the complexity of it. There are now artists and there are names in Gothic art, and I just brought in some works from a sketchbook by a 13th century French traveling master mason named Vuillard. And this is one of his pages. Here's the whole book, or facsimile. It's just his little sketchbook. He traveled around to all the major cathedrals, and he also did figures, he took notes. It's just observing what young budding artists are taught to do now. You make notes of the things you see. You keep a book of that. So there he is with a snail and a figure in chain armor. And then he also began to write instructions, and he has some pages on tools and know-how. So we get a greater sense of individuals. We're moving in a world now where it's not those so much the pilgrims who are seeking the veneration of sacred relics. partly for the value of travel and the novelty and having the world open up to them, but also because through contact with that, they were reassured by the church that they would be going to heaven. So there was a strong religious backing to it with the Benedictine order, arranging hostels along the way, providing this guidebook. This is a good place to stop. Don't stop here. This is an area where thieves come out of that pass. You don't want to go that way. And tell you, look at this relic or that relic. I don't want to say it in front of Marty because she can speak French. So it's VUILLARD, say it, Marty.
I don't know.
Stop chewing.
I know those letters.
HONNECOURT. Yeah, that's in English. It would Anku. Well, see? Okay. And he lived in about the second, he flourished in the second quarter of the 13th century. You see, he's made a sketch of the kind of windows that we associate with Gothic churches. See more of that. And he does studies of the details of Gothic churches. So you have a sense of the kind of things they're scrutinizing. Some of his drawings, I couldn't find the one that I was really seeking, was showing an arcade where if you were to see that arcade now, his drawing helps you see it because the center column in this arcade is just slightly wider than all the rest. Very slightly. And his drawing makes that very obvious. Why I say that? It's a reminder that they were seeing and observing and sensitive to things that just go whoosh, right over our heads. And they're very meticulous drawings of each particular detail. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to make this, I'm going to be reading a lot to you today. Can't help myself. But we're going to just do a little of this school teachery compare and contrast between what a Romanesque church was like and what this new development in the mid-late 12th century and flourishing in the 13th century, what these Gothic churches were like. This is a Romanesque one. It's actually, it's Paray-le-Monial. It's very near Cluny, but whereas Cluny, that major Benedictine monastery, has been so largely demolished, this church is a smaller version of what that one was like. And you can see there's that emphasis on these towers, but lots of wall. That there's a sense of these being sort of strong, impregnable, and I think they do almost imitate. This is safety here. This is like enduring. As opposed to Amiens Cathedral. A little more than a century after that. Something has happened, not just to architecture, but to the whole culture to produce something like this. Or the interior of the Romanesque church. This is Saint-Sernin in Toulouse. And a Gothic church. Now, the shapes in terms of the way the building would be used are the same. There's that long space focused down toward the altar, and there's an aisle on either side if you're going to have a church with many people coming by, especially you have many relics that they're going to come for saints' days and want to stop in chapels on the side. So you can have that traffic flow and the great height and use of stone vaultings to make these less vulnerable to fires. And here's the fellow that I'm going to read some of his writing. In it's a situation, it's not exactly analogous, but he is as important to the development of Gothic art, this man, as Justinian was in the creation of that magnificent Hagia Sophia. So his name is Abbot Suger, Suger. And he was, from the time he was a kid, when he was 9, he was sent to the abbey at Saint Denis. So that's Saint and then Denis. Denis is the patron saint of France. And the Church of Saint Denis, which I will get to in a few moments, how many of you have been there? Not all that many people go to up to that suburb anymore, but that's where French kings were buried and French queens were, they had the coronation there. So although he's an abbot, he's not involved in an order. He's a sort of like a more secular branch of Roman Catholicism. And he was there as abbot. He was clearly a man of just extraordinary diplomatic skills, and we'll see great ambitions and taste. He was the teacher for, I guess it was Louis VII. And when Louis VII was went on a crusade, he took over the administration of France. So this is a man who's very high in the world. And he was then the abbot there at the Church of Saint Denis, which had been founded in the 8th century. I'll give you that story too while we're still looking at this. So about Saint Denis. It's a complicated story. He supposedly was martyred in the middle of the 3rd century. Any Christian at that time being martyred. And the first attempts at martyring him did not succeed. He was put on a grill. I can't remember what the second was. Something else went after him. And then finally he was beheaded. That succeeded, but he picked up his head and he carried it 2 miles to the site of the current Saint Denis. So this venerated man, and it was his relics that were here. And they have found a cemetery down underneath the site. So the church that was there was there was a 9th century, I think it was late 8th or 9th century church. It was pretty shabby for being of such great importance. And Suger decided to refurbish it. And he describes in writing that still survives. He wrote about, and I'm going to read you some of what he wrote, about what he did and why he did it. And he had a vision about architecture. What you see in this, unfortunately, except for the face in his hands, they're 12th century. Everything else in there is 19th century, but it reproduces what was an original window there for him. So he's associated with stained glass windows. And he is shown there presenting a stained glass window. It's down in the lower right corner of that large window, which shows the tree of Jesse. That's of the ancestry of Jesus. So he is essentially offering this window, this novelty that he's introducing into this church. And then it's in his humble brag, there it is. And then it joins in it. So there he is. There is something actually by him you can see in this country, in the Washington National Gallery. There is this chalice. It's about this high. It's sardonyx from Egypt, from the 2nd century BC. And then the filigree, the gold, the gems, he had workmen apply because he loved beauty. and he loved gems, and he loved light. There's another Dennis involved in this. Two other Dennises. There's a man named Dennis the Areopagite, who was mentioned in the book in the Bible. And then there was a Dennis from maybe the 4th century who wrote treatises about light. And the light is the one thing perceptible by our senses that we have the least. We can't taste it, we can't touch it, it has no temperature. It is the most disembodied. It is the sense that takes us closest to the spiritual world. That's our only way to reach it, some sort of something of this world that can be an analogy. So there's light. Now, these three Dennises were all smushed together in the medieval understanding. So Suger, when he's interested in light, he's honoring Saint Denis, and he's also honoring what he thought was the philosophy or the way of looking at the world that Dennis had. So first thing he did with it to rebuild this church, he says, well, it needed a new entrance. It was just too shabby. So he had new doors put in. And then this is right in the middle of the 12th century. And then when that was done, he says, well, then the area down toward the altar, which is the most important part because that's where the service is held, that needed to be restored. And the place in between he would have done, but he died before it could be done. So I want to read you in the book of Abbot Suger of Saint-Denis on what was done during his administration. That's why he titled this book. And this is just hunker down because, as I say, you're going to get a bunch of this. But I'll give you glitter to look at what's going on. In the 23rd year of our administration, on a certain day when we sat in general chapter, conferring with our brethren about common and private matters, just standard business meeting, these same dear brothers and sons began to beg me vigorously and in love that I should not remain silent about the fruit of our past labors, but rather with pen and ink should preserve for future memory the additions which the munificence of Almighty God bestowed upon this church during the time of our leadership. You get that? It's God that provides it during his leadership. In the acquisition of new things, the recovery of lost ones, the multiplication of refurbished possessions, the construction of the buildings, the accumulation of gold, silver, precious gems, and quality textiles. So, as I say, now, concerning the first addition to the church, that was the new doors. She describes that. And then, even while this was being carried out at great expense, however, because of the inadequacy we often felt on special days, such as at the Feast of the Blessed Denis, the fair, and many other times, there would be local fairs. And in the Gothic cathedrals, unlike those Romanesque churches, since these tend to be in cities, they're not attached to monasteries. If you have a large meeting of some kind and it rains or it's not one, you take it inside. So they had fairs, they had markets, a lot went in the churches and around the churches. So he said, of the inadequacy often felt on special days, such as the Feast of Blessed Denis, the fair, and many other times, when the narrowness of the place forced women to run to the altar on the heads of men as on the pavement with great anguish and confusion. I think that's probably a little hyperbole. Can't you just see these women rushing down on the heads of men to get down to the altar? For this reason, moved by divine inspiration and encouraged by the counsel of wise men, as well as the prayers of many monks, in order to avoid the displeasure of the holy martyrs, the dead, I undertook to enlarge and amplify the noble monastic church. consecrated by the divine hand, devoutly praying both in our chapter and in the church that he who is the beginning and end, the Alpha and Omega, should join the good end with a good beginning by way of a sound middle. See, he did one end of the church, then he's going to work on the other, then he's hoping to get to the middle. So kind of personality comes through in this, isn't it? Plus that view of the complete intertwining of the divine working through you, a not very typical attitude for contemporaries. So he talks about putting up these main doors, which he did with great expense and a heavy outlay for their gilding. And then he had an inscription written on it. All you who seek to honor these doors, marvel not at the gold and expense, but at the craftsmanship of the work. And that is also a new attitude, because that is looking at it as art. It's not just the subject matter. The noble work is bright, but being nobly bright, the work should brighten the minds, allowing them to travel through the lights, to the true light, where Christ is the true door. The golden door defines how it is immanent in these things. The dull mind rises to the truth through material things, and it is resurrected from its former submersion when the light is seen. Now, could you follow that? It's wonderfully artful play, but it's you can remove yourself from this world. Light takes you out of this world into the divine light, where truth is found. And still more. This is about the attitude. As can be found, blah, 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 blah. We, along with our brothers and fellow servants, we were mercifully enabled to bring such a glorious and famous work to a favorable conclusion, God having aided us and given us success to us in our endeavors. We were all the more indebted to God and the holy martyrs, insomuch as he, by long postponement, has reserved the task for our age and labor. You see that? And let the church get shabby so that we could be the ones to restore it. Now it sounds like PR, but this is profound religion for PR. For who am I, and what is my Father's house, that I should have presumed to begin or hope to complete such a noble, pleasing edifice, unless relying upon the aid of divine mercy and of the holy martyrs, I applied myself completely, mind and body, to the enterprise. Yet he who gave the will also provided the power. And because the good work was present in the will, it came to perfection with God's help. Two more, and then we're through. We'll say, oh, class over yet? This is more about his playing with light. Another inscription. When the new rear part is joined to that in front, the church shines, brightened in its middle. For bright is that which is brightly coupled with the bright, and which the new light pervades. Bright is the noble work enlarged in our time. I, who was sujet, having been leader while it was accomplished. And only one more. We're like,
excuse me, Maggie?
yes.
Those of us at home are seeing the chalice.
Yes.
Is that what we're supposed to be seeing?
Yes, it's just something to look at while I'm talking.
Great. Okay. Enjoy the talking. Thank you.
Yes, I'm doing to the light. Of course, I think the whole thing is worth reading, but there is one more. He talks about how he's scouring Western Europe for gems for this. I mean, he is like combing the coffers, getting at noblemen, noble women when they were overcome with an effusion of worship and delight in here. They offered the gems they had They took things out of their own crowns. They took them out of their own coffers. So here, use them here for France, for Saint Denis, for God. And then the last. I used to confer with Jerusalemites. Now, I'm not quite sure. I'm thinking Westerners who'd settled in Jerusalem despite the Crusades. And I was eager to learn from those who had seen the treasures of Constantinople and decorations of Hagia Sophia, whether these here, his own place, right, were worth anything in comparison. When some considered these here to be even greater, it seemed to us that through fear of the Franks, though that's because the Westerners had, for half a century, they sieged to and conquered Constantinople, and they used Hagia Sophia as their own cathedral. Anyway, he said, it seemed to us that through fear of the Franks, those marvelous objects of which we had once heard had been prudently put away, lest by the impetuous greed of a few stupid people, the friendship nurtured between Greek and Latin should suddenly change to sedition and warfare. Well, yeah, it was going on. For cunning is a preeminently Greek characteristic. In other words, you say, oh, it wasn't probably looking so good in Hagia Sophia right now because there's those cunning Greeks that hid things so that the French wouldn't take them. Thus, it may be that there is more displayed here where it's safe than there. Probably Latin. I think it would, yeah, be Latin. Okay, now finally we get to the building. This. When you look at the exterior well, of course, you can see that something has happened. It was never completed. It doesn't have the requisite symmetry, which was so seldom achieved. But it doesn't look all that special. And it looks very much here's more what it looked like originally, because this suffered catastrophically at the time of the French Revolution and the revulsion against the Roman Catholic Church and against Roman French royalty. You can imagine that this would be one of the first places destroyed. But it's not all that different from Conch. Main door, two towers. Interior of Conch. I'll find every reason I can to bring that in. And the interior of Saint Denis. So what, I'll tell you, as if you were a school class, what three things that he does that are new. There are items that existed, but they had never been brought together. And clearly he brings them together because his desire is to make a church that is as immaterial, as light suffused as possible. Pointed arches, rib vaulting, and flying buttresses. All ways to get rid of walls. And this is the part that survives from his church. It has that distinct upward pull, doesn't it? And the stained glass. Now, I no longer have, there's a whole other text that would belong in here. If you have a Christian Bible, I can tell you what to go to. It's Revelations chapter 21. Where there's a description of what the heavenly Jerusalem is. And it's described as being made all of gems, amethyst, agate, chrysolite, pearls, chalcedony, beryl. In a Gothic church, or any church that has stained glass windows, when the light shines through those windows and it hits a wall opposite, what color is that wall going to be? It's going to be the color of the glass, so that the building looks as if it were made out of gems. It's going to be an earthly approximation of heavenly Jerusalem. And you can just get little specks of the light there. That's at Conch. What an extraordinary difference. Now, Conch is outside the norm, and that it is narrower than the other churches. So everything is here squeezed and more vertical than standard, but I don't know the terms. I'd say this is elegant, urbane, fluent. Forthright, sturdy. Yes, absolutely. There would have been banners, and in all of these churches, there were banners and there were colors and clutter of things and gifts that are not there anymore, but still the structure is much more austere. So here you're looking up in the area around behind the altar, because in these churches where there were many pilgrims, they would not want to see not only the main relic here, would be Sainte Foy on the altar, but there would be other relics for them to see in chapels around behind. And so you could walk around, even during a service, and go around and there's this altar and this altar and this. If you go to the Church of St. John the Divine in Manhattan, it's more along the sides, but you have that sense where there's, you can perform acts of devotion and inspection all the way around. So this has an aisle around behind it, and this is what you look up into. Kind of wild, isn't it? What is that? I think I remember this. I'm terrible with numbers, but what floats into my mind, the nave is 78 feet itself high. Yeah. And I did check in commercial buildings now, standard one floor is about 15 feet. So this is multiple stories high when you go in there. And this is in Saint Denis. My goodness. There's a pattern. You can follow the pattern. There's space. You can walk around. You can accommodate so many people at so many altars. And you can look at them and you can look around, and it's an easy, understandable, a logical scheme. And so what? Well, so I say, you know, he was using his builders, whoever, we don't know who the builders, what master masons he hired. But when they use pointed arches, that's not new, because at Cluny, when it still existed, you can see those, they were already using pointed arches. There are other churches, Romanesque churches, where you can find that. And this is Conch. So those white, the sort of little bands that go across, those are indicating where there's a rib that grows across the ceiling. And then the heavy black, that's the extent of wherever the wall is. The walls are fairly thick. If you look along the nave, look how little teeny openings for windows. And they don't even try in this diagram to give you a model of what the ceiling looks like back around. There's no way to translate that down into a logical linear scheme. But this is Saint Denis. There are successive churches on top of one another, and this diagram is trying to show that. But so you're walking, I'm showing a view, you're standing right here. So these are vaulted units. Oh, we talked about groin vaults before. Got to go back over the diagrams. With those round arches, if you use a round arch, if you want good standard architecture, you have to put it over a square shape space, because you want if the arches are semicircular, you want to have the same diameter on both sides so that they rise to the same height. If you don't, as in this church, you get that billowing like it's a sail in between. That is square on the sides and it billows up in the middle. You're also going to have it billow if you're using round arches, if, God forbid, you're not putting it over square space. Because if it's over a smaller one, the radius is smaller, the arch isn't going to go as high. And you get something like this, what's on the left. So there's the answer. In the right, you use a pointed arch. You just, no matter how wide the space it spans, you just make the point come up to the same level. And there's more continuity in the sense of design, with, even though some are like this and some are like that, but there's still a kind of a cohesiveness. Yeah, that would be top of the ceiling. So, yeah. And then they have also with the pointed arch, I believe I mentioned that last time, it's moving a little bit more toward the vertical, so more of the weight is going to come down supported instead of running to come splat down in the middle in the ground. So it can be stronger, lighter, and visually more cohesive. And if you want it stronger and lighter yet, at those joins, you put a rib. That does all the work. And what comes in between is just like a covering, like a little piece of cloth. You can make it several bricks thick. You can make it however thick you want. It's going to weigh less, use less stone, look more uniform. So that's pointed ribbed groin false. Which meant that you could put it over spaces. A bay is the name of the space under one unit. This is a bay from there to there to there to there. That's sort of like, it's not even a rectangle, but you can make it look. It flows. And using these kind of ribs becomes so much a thing that anybody been to King's Chapel in Cambridge? This is 15th century, but that's the ultimate use, 16th century use of ribs. So one of the other things that it aids is like, at least this is standard, a party line that it's going to look like it weighs less because you're just seeing line. And we know line is two-dimensional. A line doesn't have bulk. So you're just looking at lines. You don't even see there's anything heavy. And in this one, in fact, they say it's only 10 centimeters thick. It's just like a sheet drawn across the top. So that he introduced. I won't show you any more about his church, but you get the idea. So those are the great things. The stained glass windows, since the stained glass windows were so badly, there's so little survived from all the assault on this building after the French Revolution. Although they are some of the earliest, would have been Gothic stained glass windows, they're just scraps, nothing to show you. This is the other text I didn't give you. This is from a manuscript of which there are many. This is the description in the final book in the Christian Bible of what heavenly Jerusalem looks like when it's described as being all the gems and gold. So there's a whole desire at this time, and evidently the wealthy would get manuscripts that describe the heavenly Jerusalem and pore over them because this is wealth. I mean, it's faith too, but that they're very interested in this and what the gems are. And then I want to go to the story of the next one, and I don't know if you recognize this from this distance at all. This Chartres Cathedral. You can see it from not quite 20 miles away. It's flat ground, and at least in the old days, then you look over the wheat fields and just this little way on the horizon, you could see. Amazing. So I want to both go over this because it has the glass, and it is wonderful church for telling the story of the times, and it isn't just wonderful shape compared to Conch there. Well, here we have Chartres from looking at it from the air. Because there's the other feature that you didn't see at Saint-Denis. It has flying buttresses, to which we will get ultimately. This is a church. Well, you can take a straw poll. Do you want to look at the front or look at it from above while I do the story? Yeah, because you can see the front there a little bit too. This isn't on the pilgrimage roads, but was visited on pilgrims going through. But it had an extremely important relic. It's called the Sancta Camisa. It supposedly was the tunic that Mary wore when she gave birth to Jesus. And the church is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. There'd been several churches on this site because the site is sacred. Not only were people coming to see that, but also some of the major fabric fairs were held here. So it was a great commercial center because fabric used to be a very important trade. So the people would come at times, the anniversary of the birth of Jesus, they would come for these fairs. And in the Gothic churches, a lot of times, most of the times, they are associated with nobility and royalty, and they're urban structures. They're not those more remote Gothic structures. So this was in town. And there had been, as they say, several churches on the site, and one built that just was, it looked quite a bit like Saint-Denis, maybe like the other Romanesque church I showed you. It was finished in 1154, and we know it was exactly that size. I can't say for the height, but it covered that much of the ground. A big church. 1194, so 40 years later, it was destroyed in a fire. So when you think of the money involved and the labor involved and the number of people in one of these, the catastrophic, but as I said last time, there's the story of medieval buildings, especially before there was stone, was, fire, fire, fire. What made this fire so terrible was that it was thought that Sancta Camisa was destroyed in the fire, that relic burnt up. And townspeople knew how to interpret this. It meant that the Virgin had withdrawn her favor from the city, and that, in fact, people needed to move. This was no longer a viable, sheltered place to be. Well, I mean, I don't even read this in every source anymore. It always used to be told about this church. there was a visiting Italian golden-tongued orator, because Chartres had a very good school, and he was there. And he tried to persuade people that no, it's not that she has withdrawn her favor. She needed a church that was greater. She was disappointed that it wasn't an adequate honor to her. And I mean, people, although they lived then, they were still just ordinary people. I'm sure a lot of them were like, oh yeah, right. But it so happened that they could hear in the distance some chanting, some jubilant chanting. Some of the cleric said, we found it in the crypt. It is not burnt. So it was clear she just needed a better church. I make it from point of view a kind of modern day, we sort of mock it, but to them that this is a serious and reliable truth. And immediately there is the outpouring of people, not only people who had money giving their money, but there were peasants who would say, I can give you these many days of my labor. I have some trees on my property that you can cut down that you can use for scaffolding. I will do this, I will do that. And so within the space of 30 years, they built this. And that's without this dominant personality like Sujet. And this was a corporate pouring out of feeling that led to this church. So it's a modern copy of what a pilgrim's medallion would be from that. And you see there's people on either end holding, remember last time I showed you the Sainte Foy in the procession where she's being carried by men on her shoulder. So there's the sacred tunic is being up above us, being there, would be carried through the town at some point in the annual procession.
People used to come from Paris to Chartres on their knees to do a pilgrimage. I think around Easter or something.
Yeah.
Right, like.
Yeah, I mean, she inspired just enormous devotion. So it's hard to get a full facade into a single photograph, but this almost makes it. Now, there are parts here of the church that survived the fire. And it was built in whatever the most modern style was. So from this section right here, that center. So that would be more like what Sujet was originally intending. So a triple doorway, 3 for the Trinity, and 3 windows with stained glass above that, and there a rose window. So that's original, and you can follow on the facade something that I'm acquainted with people who say, oh, I really don't like that church because it's not the same. No, of course it's not. Because as the style changed, as times changed, they changed the design. They aren't working from architects' plans and drawings. What have been found sometimes are stones that have like little sketched sections. And other than that, it's probable, there are books written on this, that's built on ratios and geometry. And so builders would know if this is the ratio, this is the module we use, and this is going to be X number times that, and then it's going to be X numbers in this direction. And they worked from that. And it changes along the way. And the changes follow what is the evolution of Gothic art. Of course, part of it here is hidden by the tree, but on this tower, you can see the solid wall. Over here, that wall is somewhat not disguised, but broken up by just putting colonnades over it. And then this is the earlier tower, and this is the later tower. This is more solid. This is more like wire and space and transparency. That's the direction that Gothic art will go. More and more dematerialized. And a cliche about them is these cathedrals are sermons in stone because they are covered with sculpture. They have stained glass windows. So all the biblical stories are here for anyone who could not read. It's there for them all the time. It's a Bible. This over the center door is Christ in Majesty, but I thought it really does make a nice one, nice excuse for me to go back to Cluny. See how a little bit more, you have to look and puzzle that out. It's a little more chaotic and the figures are flatter. It's more like a drawing compared to that. This is lucid, easily understood. This is the age in which universities, scholastic learning is developing. Diagramming is developed. Just this whole idea of systematizing and making something so clear. And you see it in their art. We'll be on that. That's the window inside. I will come back to the windows, but not today. So it's been cleaned, or I think I don't know if it's completely cleaned now. But it sort of changes what many people think of these cathedrals because the conception is that they are a dim interior with this sparkling light as it comes in the windows. You say, no, now it's light everywhere. But you get the size.
That is a working process for me as well. I know.
Mhm.
I just struck by how all the skinny they were too.
That's right. Yeah, they're called jam sculptures because they just fit on the door jamb. They're made to fit that. So I want to talk about the structure here. Because there's nothing weighty here, right? Compared to that. That is, that's an architectural change, but that has to be some kind of deeper understanding of change of the universe, God's world, your place in the world. Not much wall. So you have diagrams coming that will show this. But just one thing you might as well see right here, when you have these windows at the top, look at the frames, the stone. Those aren't, they're not set in, oh, how can I explain this? There's not, here's the base of it, and then here's the window. It's slanted down, so it takes even less wall. They just cut away the wall whenever possible. And here where it's closed because there's actually a roof outside that, they're not leaving it blank wall. There's a arcade over there, so you not have a sense of anything solid beyond that. They're just called bosses. Yeah. And if you look in Macaulay's book, you see the great labor involved in inserting one of those from up above, or in fact, the labor of getting anything up here. When you remember again, everything is being hoisted by people walking on those wheels. Compared to. So now you're in one side aisle and looking across. It does look like an organism, doesn't it? It's like something growing and reaching and stretching. It doesn't, there's nothing inert. And for each of those like little colonnettes, They're not decorated. Each one of those attaches someplace to something in the vaulting up above. So it is like following the lines in a diagram or in outlining. This is the heading, this is a subheading, this is a sub-subheading, and you can follow it at everything from up. You can think of it as going from the top down, or you can follow each one of those surging up to the top. As opposed to, doesn't it look like a membrane pulled between them up at toward the top? That's like denies the fact that it's stone. Yeah.
What was going on? That change. This expression was because engineer is only new.
It's probably some multi origin, but some of it is that sujet and that emphasis on light and lightness. And he's advocating that, and then they're beginning to work in that. I don't think there's a single. So here's the plan. You can see that this is ready for many pilgrims because the main altar would be down in here. And then you have all these chapels, and people can be going in and around all the time without interrupting the service. And there are major entrances on the north and the south, not just at the west. So you could have terrific traffic flow through here without problem. Yeah. There's an extending chapel, the Lady Chapel. That's a little weird, right? That's a little different. But then here's the other question. Where's the wall? Just about. Because down here, look, that's glass. Glass, glass. It's just buttresses. Compared to our old friend. So now the diagrams for that, the flying buttress. And then, yes, we have a few minutes left. Let's see, I think. So here, the left part is like, you're looking at the wall along the side of the nave, and then you have a cross section. What's going on just outside that? So how you can have all this open for window? Well, it's because all the weight is going out here. And windows can be no good unless light can get to them. You can't have this solid, because that only certain times of day would you get any light in there at all. This takes the weight of the very top ribs, pushes it outside. This takes the weight here, pushes it outside. This takes the weight here, pushes it outside. The weight increases. This goes out further and further. This is the area where there's a roof over the aisles. So you can't open that up, but you can make like either a walkway or a kind of a blind arcade there. So the building's outside again. This is like, you know what? Hi, Sophia. It's achieving the same thing by different means. Very, very similar. And there, so the flying buttresses. Even on the outside, you don't have a sense that there's a wall because you have protuberance, recess, protuberance, recess. There's no flat surface. And there's sculpture around here. These are saints. They're more of the divine realm, the religious realm. There you're walking along the top. Just think of this. This is all in that 30 years. And there's walking back around Tabitha. I especially like that one for the scale, since this is one of the smaller parts of the church. Now you're lying on the floor down by the altar. Or a cliche is that these churches have a skeletal structure, and it is just like the skin pulled across. This is the exterior back by the altar, where even the buttresses are more and more as if they were a wire. They are so thin. Look at that. Somehow that just doesn't look like that's something of stone. So, and the windows, an increasing desire. This is on the south side, the windows, the south entrance. And then this fits in more windows. See? Oh. So it is the Western equivalent of Hagia Sophia. And let's see. Next time, not now, not going to run it over today. One more, just very small. This one, I hope it can look a little weird to you. It's only part of a church because they exceeded what was possible and it fell down. The desire to create something high. Yeah. That's what it's like inside. And then actually it fell several times. It's the cathedral in Beauvais, Beauvais. So I'll show you that, and then we'll move into architecture of iron and into the modern world, where all cathedrals, if they're cathedrals, are like the Woolworth Building, cathedrals of commerce, which is what it was called. Okay, now that's it. Do you have questions? Any? No? Okay. Take your sanctified selves.
Thank you so much, Maggie.